we're very happy to have. And he owes you 50, and I get 10%.
Thank you for the introduction. I'd like to also introduce my wife, Catherine Barth, who is an architect and a scuba diver. Worked with me on projects in Israel, Turkey, and Cyprus. And a little personal note, when we were beginning our relationship, I arrived, she was living in DC at the time, and I arrived, and she said, I got a special treat for you. And it was a bunch of oysters, and she said, I have just gotten these on my open water dive in the Chesapeake Bay. And I picked them up just for you, and they're the best oysters I've ever had in my life. I would say timing is everything. For me, that was absolutely the case. I started my graduate work in 1960, unaware of the fact that that year was the first year that another graduate student named George Bass had started to do serious underwater archaeology on a shipwreck off the coast of Turkey. And in Israel, an oceanographer named Ed Link had started to do explorations underwater of an ancient harbor site. I had no idea this was going on in 1960. I started graduate school hoping that I might be able to study how the ancients related to the sea, specifically the Romans. And it didn't take me very long to realize that there was not very much written about this. And I said, oh, here's my chance for any kind of dissertation out the window. So I got interested. My secondary interest was in ancient coins. I'm a numismatist. And I had an opportunity in 1962 to do a seminar at the American Numismatic Society in New York to learn how ancient coins could be seen as historical documents. It was a way that rulers had of reaching their people with their message. They didn't have social media then. And I thought, okay, fine, that's what I'll do. And again, luck would have it, in 1963, the University of Chicago and Indiana University decided to do an archaeological project together in Greece. And I was invited to join as a graduate student. And at the last minute, the person who was charged with studying the ancient coins, a professor from Chicago, dropped out for personal reasons, and I was given that responsibility. And I got to this lovely site in Greece, which I'll be talking about in a minute, in 1963, and discovered that a good part of the ancient site was underwater. And whenever I had any spare time, I was snorkeling over these ruins under the water, realizing that I was literally swimming over time. And at the end of the summer season, I asked the director of the project, when are you going to do something in the water? And he said, we don't do that. So I said, well, what if I learn how to scuba dive? Does your license permit me to do it? He said, yes. 1964, came back with another young man named Joe Shaw, who went on to be an extremely successful archaeologist on the island of Crete. The two of us put together what was really the first effort to try to translate the techniques of land archaeology into the sea. This doesn't mean that people had not been catching or bringing things out of the water. I should mention at the beginning of this, a man named Scalius. Herodotus, an ancient historian, told us about the exploits of this man. He was the first real Navy SEAL during Persia's invasion of Greece in the 5th century. Before a major battle, Scalius dove into the water and cut all the anchor lines of the Persian ships so they were in complete disarray, and the Greeks were able to win a major battle. How about that? 5th century BC. But mostly what would happen before the beginning of archaeology in the sea, it was salvage. And I had an opportunity, let's see if I can get this right, here we go. This is a slide, an image of a piece of a frieze from Ostia, which is a seaport of ancient Rome. By the way, if you ever get to Rome, make sure you go down to see Ostia. It's a wonderful sight. Much of what you would see in Pompeii, you can see in Ostia, but without the crowds. But here we have an image of the fishermen pulling up a statue of Heracles from the sea. They had no idea how it got there, but they realized it must have been a gift from the gods, so they created a temple to Heracles. This was salvage. And again, if you get to any museum in Greece, and you'll, oops, I went the wrong way, there we go. You will see these wonderful bronze statues like this one, found on an island called Antikythera in 1900 by divers, and you see one of the divers in. Most of the bronze statues that you find in museums, ancient statues, come from the sea. The ancients didn't know, they didn't go around throwing statues into the sea. These are all from shipwrecks and isolated finds.
Why were the statues on the ships?
Being moved because the Roman elite loved Greek things. And when Rome conquered Greece, they looted all the ancient sites to bring statues back to Rome to their villas. That's why some of them didn't make it. By the way, does salvage still go on? You bet it does. In 2015, off the coast of Israel, a hoard of gold coins, 2,000 gold coins, were found in the sea by an amateur diver who happened to stumble upon it. The sands had washed away in a storm, and there were some coins, the largest hoard of gold coins found anywhere in the world, 2015. So there's still stuff down there, but it really isn't, it's salvage. And I'm interested in archaeology. Let's see if there we go. I quickly realized in graduate school that if I wanted to do anything with the relationship of ancient societies to the sea, I probably had to look in the sea itself. That the sea could become my archive or my library. And people have always asked me, Bob, what in God's name are you doing in Colorado? I say, well, I always like to sort of paraphrase Julius Caesar. I came, I saw, I stayed. You know why I stayed. Great place to bring up a family, and if you like to trout fish and hike and all that, that's what I like about those places. So I've added a couple of hours to my library or my archive. So I call myself a time detective. Every time I watch television, I hear them talking about cold cases. I think, oh, you think you got a cold case? What about one that's 2,000 years old? Now, when marine archaeology really started, it started with shipwrecks. Everyone likes a shipwreck. A shipwreck is a time capsule. Here I am working with a National Geographic photographer on the frames of an ancient merchant ship. I'm holding a light for him as he's taking a photograph of a graffito that was scratched on one of the frames, and I think it was let's say a stevedore, or maybe the charge of stevedores, who wrote down a number of how many of these ceramic containers, the amphorae, might have been on board this particular ship, and that's what we're photographing. And if you're lucky, you can find things like this. This one was off the coast of Marseille. Notice all of these ceramic containers, again, amphorae or amphoras if you want in English, and all stacked up. Underneath these would be the hull of a ship. It is interesting that in, let's say first or second centuries of BC, before the Common Era, France imported wine from Italy. I rather like that. French aren't too keen on that, but that was the case. I notice all of these, the pots don't have stoppers. So what happened to them? Well, chances are that stoppers was simply a piece of leather tied over the top with a string, and over time it's gone. But all of us have always hoped to find one with a stopper intact. Imagine 2,000-year-old wine. That might be like. You probably wouldn't like it because the ancient put all kinds of junk in their wine. Marble, honey, oh, terrible. Anyway, the trouble is, with what's been going on in the Mediterranean recently with deep trawling, and as we begin to think about mining in the deep waters, it's going to be more and more difficult to find wrecks like this. They are being destroyed on a daily basis, but there's a lot still out there for sure. Now I'm going to start talking about a place called Kank Cancri was the eastern seaport of the ancient city of Corinth. Corinth during Roman times was a very important site. It was a tourist destination for very wealthy people. And if you were coming from the eastern Mediterranean going to the west, the simplest thing to do was to go to Cancri on one ship and then take a wagon across a couple of miles to the other side, to the Corinthian Gulf, and from there pick a ship up to Rome. So this was on a major trade route. In antiquity, before the Roman period, there was a drag strip across the isthmus. The Isthmus Canal was only about 4 miles now. The canal was not built, but by the way, the Emperor Nero was the first one to start building the canal. And when the canal was actually finished in the late 19th century, the Austrian architect was amazed to find that in 1 year's work, engineers working for Nero had done 25% of the digging. 1 year, 25%, amazing. But anyway, Cancri was the site where I started, where, as I said, I was swimming over time. And you see here, this is roughly the idea of what the harbor looks like, circular harbor. And my arrow is pointing towards an apsidal building that looked like this here, or more closely like this. Now, why this was important is because during the course of our excavations in 1963, the Greek workmen from these 5 villages nearby the site, where they would provide workmen for the site and provide the wine and food and so on that we had, all of them said, this is the chapel where St. Paul worshipped when he came to Corinth. Again, how do you know that? My father, my grandfather, the tradition passed down to them. And they said, when are you going to do something about it? Well, it was underwater. We didn't know what to do. Another slide taken actually in 1964. You can see on this slide, it looks like there's a floor, some sort of a concrete floor that's been placed over a bunch of rubble. And that's exactly what we thought might be there. And our idea was, Joe Shaw and I had the thought, well, how are we going to excavate here? How would we do that? Well, what we came up with was, we got a high pressure water hose. And we had someone standing, and the water depth is about maybe a half a meter at most, standing there creating a current this way, and we had, one of us would be down there with our scuba tanks in very shallow water, fanning stuff up into this current to be carried away to try to get underneath the floor to see what might be there. We didn't know, no one else had done that. We had no idea how to do it. That was our effort to try to work, to excavate here. This was in 1964. I happened to be working the day when water, because of the high pressure water hose, couldn't see a damn thing, so we had to work for a while and back off, let the dust settle to see what we had actually done. I'm working away, and all of a sudden I put my hand under there, like, oh, I cut it on glass. Oh, there must be a beer bottle under here. This is not a sealed deposit. How could this possibly happen? So I had to wait for it to clear, and much to my surprise, what I'd stumbled upon was a glass panel, a panel depicting Homer. Now, Homer looks like this. How do I know it's Homer? It's hard to read it, but there is an inscription above his head that says Homer. But he looks like a Christian saint. 4th century AD, the century where the Roman Empire was Christianizing. We have here a picture of a pagan sage with Christian iconography. Interesting how the traditions are merging. Well, when I cut my hand like this, Bob Scranton, the director of the project, said, wait a minute, we're not sure what we have, but enough had been revealed that this was clearly a glass picture, something called an opus sectile work. And it's extremely unusual to find one made of glass. He wisely said, stop. All you have to do is make a mistake with this hose and you're gonna blow the whole thing apart. We'll figure out a way of doing this. Unfortunately for me, 65, 66, 67, the United States Army decided I had other things to do. So I missed out on those particular years. I came back in 68 when in fact it was possible. By then we knew that there were something like 9 stacks of these panels important because we knew from an ancient text that one end of the harbor of Cancri was a temple to the goddess Isis. Isis became the goddess of mariners. Egyptian scenes, it looked to us like we had stumbled upon panels that may well have been intended for some sort of rehabilitation of the pagan shrine in the 4th century. And why would that have happened? Because I just said it, that's the century of the Christianizing of the Roman Empire. That's true, except for one brief moment when the Emperor Julian came along. He was a pagan who tried to stop this trend and rehabilitate paganism as the religion of the Roman Empire. So I once wrote an article, most people seem to agree with it. This may well have been, these panels may have been ordered during the 2 years that Julian was Emperor of Rome. The panels we now know from a glass expert at Corning Museum in New York, the panels were actually made in Alexandria, where the major shrine of Isis was, shipped to Cancri, still in their shipping crates, because Julian was only around for 2 years, and then no one knew quite what to do with these panels, and they were left here in that room in a soggy mess, much like this. This is what these panels look like. We were able to realize there were about 120 of these panels, 1 meter by 1.5 meters. A tremendous discovery of art history, really earth-shattering. How come no one's ever heard of it? Well, some people have. But what happened was in 1968, the Greek government, the monarchy of Greece, was overthrown by a military junta. And the colonels who took charge could care less about archaeology. We lost our permit to dig. These panels with soggy messes were taken to a museum nearby Nafleon, left there for a while, then transferred to another museum. Time and neglect, and unfortunately, not many of them have been destroyed. Only recently, I mean within the last 4 or 5 years, has the Greek government and various glass experts tried very hard to begin to try to salvage what they could. The panels, glass panels were packed face to face without bubble wrap between them, but with straw. And over time in the sea, the glass had gotten stuck together. So it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. But anyway, that was a fantastic find. That what a way for me to start my archaeological career. A couple of weeks ago, in early June, I was back in Cancri for a project I'll be talking about in a minute. And I went to the museum where these panels are being worked on. And I tried desperately to get to talk to the director of the museum to share with him or her the story of how the panels were first found. Because nobody, I'm the last guy standing for this project, by the way, in the 1960s. But unfortunately, I couldn't, nobody was there, just a young woman collecting tickets, and she couldn't help me very much. I wanted someone to take my oral history before it's lost. We'll see what happens. Now, what I'm looking at now is a photograph I took a couple weeks ago of a Christian basilica that was built over the remains of the Isis temple. It was a holy spot. The god or gods worshipped there changed. How often this happens in our history, but the site itself remains. So a Christian basilica built sometime in the 6th century over the Isis shrine. Did they even know it was there? Who knows? Right. So when I think back about the Greek workmen saying, yeah, they may have worshipped there, well, they were a little off, but there was a Christian church there at one time. That was pretty important. Now, I was invited back to be a consultant because, as I said, I'm the last person standing from the original group of people who worked there. A new project was formed by the American School of Classical Studies in Athens, the FREA, which is the name for the Department of Underwater Archaeology, and the Hellenic Center for Marine Research, which is their version of Woods Hole. 3 groups gotten together now to do a systematic survey of the ancient harbor to expand on what we were able to do and never really able to publish it, and then go beyond that to look at the whole area of the surrounding dome. It's a pretty exciting project, and that's where I was in the month of June. Now this slide is really amazing. Someone mentioned satellite imagery, which This particular slide, if you look carefully at it, there's incredible detail here. This was done by this gentleman, Max Freiling, a German scholar, holding in one hand he could put the drum in one hand, in the other hand an iPhone. And with those two instruments and the right software, you could get images like that. Absolutely extraordinary. And I think back on all the work and hassle I had trying to get aerial photographs. One place I did it up, had with a parasail, hanging from a parasail, my camera shooting down on an ancient site. That's falling out of LA, been a nightmare, and now it can be done. It's amazing.
Can you show the image again?
Pardon me?
Can you show the image again? That you just showed?
Oh, yes, I can. Back up a minute.
Yeah, I mean,
See the detailing? Here you can see the stones themselves.
wow.
And this is really, really interesting. To get up here. Notice this little thin circle here. I remember that from 1963.
It was a large stone basin, and I don't know what in God's name it's doing there. And no one else has been able to figure it out either, but at least now we have some idea that this is a loading platform. And what really makes this one exciting for me is you see in the upper left-hand corner, that little blob up there is beach rock. Now, beach rock will only form at the surface of the water, and now it's about a meter below. So what's happened? There's been some movement of the earth in this area. Well, that doesn't surprise me because it's a very tectonically active area, and we think now that the northern part of the harbor has gone down, and at one point in time, this is probably a headland, and it too has submerged at some point in time. And a study of that beach rock, going into the beach rock with great detail, looking for organic material and what's underneath the beach rock, is a big project for next summer and may give us a real clue as to the history of the ups and downs of the harbor. Pretty exciting stuff. All from a drone you can put in one hand and an iPhone. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. There's Max hard at work. And this is the larger survey that's going to be done. And the next two, we started last summer, and we have a lot planned for a coastal study and an underwater study of this whole area of the Saronic Gulf. Lots of questions. We know Corinth was wealthy. There's been a lot of work by the Danes on the other harbor at Lechian, the one that faces to the west, and it's much larger than Cancri. We couldn't figure out why would that be the case. But we've also discovered already that the harbor at Cancri is much larger than we had originally expected. And we've done some side scan sonar underneath the harbor and found clusters of round stones underneath the water. And what it are? This is ancient ballast. A ship coming in empty would have ballast in it. The ballast was dumped in the deep water, and cargo would be taken on, and the cargo would be the ballast to be taken elsewhere. You come to any kind of a harbor site like Cancri, and you know what was imported, but we don't know yet what was exported. The export's obviously not there. A lot of unknown questions, kind of exciting. And this is going to be absolute state-of-the-art using underwater robots. It's an exciting project to be part of. And I'm glad I'm going to be a consultant. Am I going to be able to dive there? No, I'm not. I've reached a point now because of health issues that I can't do that kind of work diving. Maybe if maybe I can do recreational diving in the Caribbean again, but the water's nice and calm and you see forever and predict what's going to happen. I'll do that, but working underwater is a different story because you never know what's going to happen. You have to be ready for it. So unfortunately, I have to sit in the sideline or sit in the boat and watch other people dive. Anyway, that was my beginning. What a place to start with the discovery of these opus sectili panels. The next big discovery I had has come in Caesarea. I mentioned that earlier, that's where underwater archaeology started in 1960. I had a chance to go back there in 1978 to work with an American group and then with the University of Haifa. And arrow is. North is in this direction, that everything you see here is man-made. And it's been scattered over the years. The harbor structures have been scattered by storms. But what was here at the very end of this northern breakwater was a very large stone, large block. And we had in our ancient text by a writer named Josephus, who told us about how Herod had built this harbor. King Herod, some of you know from biblical studies, King Herod had built this harbor and had lowered large stones into the sea to build the harbor, so to protect trees. Well, one of these stones appears at the end of the breakwater as a pierhead, so it's a stabilizing element for the breakwater that was built behind it. It's a block that's 11 by 15 by 4 meters. That's a big block of stone. And I had tremendous respect for Roman engineering, and Herod had good engineers, but they were not interested in building in the sea. So he must have had the Romans involved, and I was able to show that in fact that's the case. Roman engineers did work in this site. But even then, how the devil did they move a block of that size, lowered precisely into the water on a east-west, north-south axis? Absolutely perfect. That's where I started excavating. And what I discovered when I came upon these wooden tie beams here next to the pole, that this was not a natural stone. This was concrete, a concrete block. And what you see here are part of the frames into which the concrete had been poured. And why the wood has survived is because it was covered up by sand over time. Okay, that's even more. How the devil did they do that? When I first found this, I said, my career is made. I have absolute evidence of alien intervention. Well, it turned out not to be the case. We took some samples of this concrete and discovered, which was again a total surprise, concrete consists of mortar, cement today, and aggregate. The mortar from this particular block was made from a volcanic sand that has unique chemical properties, or let's put it this way, properties that are chemically unique to sand that comes from the Bay of Naples area, 1,200 miles away. Sand to make the concrete at Caesarea had been shipped from there to Israel today, 1,200 miles. We have no evidence in our texts about this kind of transport of raw material. Having gone back to this place many times and looked at every concrete block that's in the harbor of Caesarea now, and after I've actually built a Roman pier on the water, which I'll get to in a minute, I'm able to say that 20,000 tons of this volcanic sand was necessary to be imported to Israel, to Caesarea, to King Herod's harbor, to build it. 20,000 tons. That's logistically, that boggles the mind even today. And to think about that there's no evidence in any of our texts for this kind of a transport. Why? Because this was sand that was brought as ballast. What we're talking about in ancient Rome, grain, corn, if you will, had the same role as oil does for modern democracy states. They had to have it. And Rome spent a lot of energy on guaranteeing that the 1 million people that lived in the city of Rome around the time of the birth of Jesus, that they were fed. Otherwise, the whole thing would go up in flames. So that meant that even though they had no formal merchant marine, they did it all through private enterprise, large ships would sail empty from the Bay of Naples to, in this case, carrying volcanic sand to King Herod's harbor for built construction, pick up other sand for ballast down to Alexandria, pick up the grain and sail back again. That's the way it was done. And again, no evidence in our text for this. Well, the question, a lot of questions from this one, was the work at Caesarea a one-off? Was it unique because Herod had a very good relationship with Augustus? But what about the other harbors that were being built at the same time?
It was Augustus that had the vision of making what was called the Mare Interna, the internal sea, into the Mare Nostrum. And to make this happen, he had to build an infrastructure, a maritime infrastructure. And throughout his reign, throughout the entire Mediterranean, harbors were being built for the first time or rehabilitated.
So the idea was, well, what if we studied the harbor sites? And there are about 150 large, ancient concrete monuments that are still available for study throughout the Mediterranean. Well, what if we studied as many as we could? I was talking about I had a couple of colleagues I talked to joining me in this project. Could we in fact come up with answers about how this worked? Why does that Roman concrete, 2,000 years old, exist? When our concrete that we put in the sea, maybe we get 50 years out of it and it falls apart. What did they know that we didn't know? Can we learn something from the past? I used to tell my students, the trouble with the ancients, they keep stealing all of our good ideas. This is a case in point. So I put together a project. Well, anyway, this is the way I think this was done. This was for a National Geographic article I wrote. That frame that you saw, those cross beams, you can see them on a hollow frame, being towed into position, and then the double walls were filled with concrete to sink the frame, and then the concrete was not poured, but lowered in baskets into the frame and then filled up. This is the way we think it was done. And you notice there are divers there who are directing things. The divers in antiquity were called urinatores, those who urinate underwater. For those of you who are divers, I think you know what I'm talking about. Urinatores, how about that? So the idea was to create a way of coring, not just taking a sample from the exterior of the block, but to develop a coring mechanism where we go into the block and take out a concrete core, and then have the core analyzed in a state-of-the-art research laboratory that does concrete, studies concrete, and wherever the samples were taken, to be taken back to this particular site, to be done by the same engineers on the same equipment, so no one could say it's apples and oranges. So I created something called the Roman Maritime Concrete Study, RomaCons. And this is a group, we put my two colleagues, Chris Brandon and John Olison. Both of these men have worked extensively, and John Olison in particular is probably the world's leading authority in ancient technology. And this is a photograph I took of them putting a core into a concrete block. The result of this was a book, Building for Eternity, which came out in 2014 and was reissued, which never happens for scholarly work, in 2021. And I know that material scientists from at least 40 countries have looked at this book. Because all of a sudden everyone said, maybe there's something about producing a green concrete that a good chunk of the pollutants that go into the air every year come from making a modern concrete, burning limestone. What if we made a concrete that was green, didn't require this? And what if we made a concrete that could last for more than 50 years? So the search is on. After this first book came out, I was the flavor of the month. Everybody wanted to talk to me about this. Not that I know very much about the chemistry, but I can tell about how we did this. And actually, I might say that I'm in the process now of working with a guy named Paulo Montero at the University of Berkeley, who is the leading authority in the world on concrete. We're doing what I hope will be a definitive study on this, because we discovered that not only is this concrete green in the sense that it doesn't give out pollutants and it can harden underwater, it heals itself. What I mean by that, if any cracks appear and salt water enters, because the Romans left modules of lime inside, salt water touches the lime and the chemical process continues and fills the crack. Self-healing concrete? Oh my God. I mean, to think about what we could do with this. Let your minds race. Right now, a lot of people are doing MIT's got a patent on one aspect of it. So does Stanford. You U.S. Army Corps of Engineers have a series of concrete blocks now in Long Island Sound that they're testing to see how they're gonna hold up. A lot of good stuff is happening now. But imagine being able to, well, let's say, I don't know if any of you are from New York City, but the big U that's going on in New York now, the building of seawalls around bottom of Manhattan to protect the financial district of New York. Not all of it is seawall, but some of it is. But imagine being able to build a seawall that's gonna last for more than 50 years. Because when a concrete structure collapses, you gotta do something with that waste, you gotta dump it somewhere. You didn't have to do that. That's pretty exciting stuff. Or I can let you, maybe this is a solution for nuclear waste. If you, let's take the Upper Mountain, which, well, we're not able to use for political reasons. But even if we were, the scientists say their nuclear waste maybe only has 10,000 years before it's gonna be a problem. But what if we line the inside of some of these caves in the mountain with a material that hardens, that turns into rock, and put the nuclear waste inside of a rock? How long would that last? A little bit more than 10,000 years. So that may be a partial solution to the problem of what we do with nuclear waste. And so it goes. So people are thinking in all different directions about it. Kind of exciting for someone who's an ancient historian to. Oh, yes, sir.
So get to ask a question? I was curious, was this like a copper dam? So that they would, that what
No,
you
it
did?
was a hollow frame.
It was just a hollow
Frame
frame?
that was dumped, sunk into the sea, and then the concrete was poured. How was it done? I'll show you in a minute.
But the water was in there when?
Yep, absolutely. The water will be displaced as you're putting in the concrete. Those of you who've seen concrete poured today, you know it comes down to trimming. It comes down to shoot. It's kind of liquid. The Roman concrete, the mortar itself is so thick they couldn't do that. So we had to figure out how the devil did they get the mortar into the frame, and then how did they get the aggregate into it? Well, the suggestion of what our solution was, let's try to build one. Using the same techniques that the Romans might have used, the same tools, and that's precisely what we did. And here is a little version, a little concrete pier that we built in the Bay of Naples, not the Bay of Naples, in Brindisi, using exactly the same materials. And the way we got the mortar in is we used trip baskets. We noticed that every Roman soldier in the Roman legions, every night built a camp. Every night. They built a camp on the march. And they all had a basket. And the basket was used to dig out and move earth and so on as they built a moat around the camp every single night. No one ever surprised the Romans at night. That I was a company commander in the army, and I can't imagine that actually could be done, but they did it. But I noticed the baskets, and my friend from Britain, Chris Brandon, found in London the Royal Basket Maker or something like some sort of an anachronism where they make baskets. We showed him a photograph of what the Roman basket was like, and he made some for us. And what we did is we put the mortar into the basket with strings at the bottom, dropped it in, and then tipped it over like that. So a big blob of this stuff came out, like a big mozzarella cheese, and then we tapped it down. And then how did they put the aggregate in? We didn't know. So throwing pieces in like, it looked like very random, and put another layer in, like, here we have one. Now, as an archaeologist, when I excavate, also a numismatist, I always would love to find an ancient coin at just the right moment to give me a date. So I sprinkled Euro coins. Imagine that 500 years from now, someone's gonna have one hell of a dissertation. The Romans were still building 500 years ago in the Bay of Naples. All the stuff about the Roman Empire folding was wrong. Anyway, a lot of fun doing that. What does a professor of classics do in the summers? Well, there I am. Some of the hardest work I've ever done is making this particular structure. Now I'll turn my attention, that was concrete. Discovery of the opus sectile panels, right up there. Study of Roman concrete has changed my life. Quite frankly, I'm still working on various aspects of this now. It's been very exciting. I've discovered that concrete can be sexy. Catherine and I worked in Cyprus at a place called Paphos, and that's what you see in the corner of the island here. It looks like this. It's a part of the ancient harbor, and this is where we had a base. We had a camp on in the ancient site itself, and had our tanks filled at a dive shop run by a couple of Australian fellows. Nice guys, of course. Being Australians, they enjoyed having parties, and we shared a few beers with them. And one of them one night said, "Bob, have you been out to the cave in the Mulia Rocks?" There's a cave in the rocks. Yeah, there's an underwater cave, and all the ceiling of the cave is filled with these ceramic containers, the emperors. They're stuck to the ceiling of the cave. Come on. So there they are. So how do you think they got there? Well, maybe they were carrying fruit or something, and they fermented, and the pots rose up. You mean the levitating pots? Maybe I didn't get it with alien intervention at Caesarea, but maybe the flying pots. Here's my chance. I still have a chance. I can't tell you how many times in my life I've gotten hints about shipwrecks. It turns out to be a dinghy that went down 3 days ago. You know, but you follow up. You follow up. So I said to this guy, "Okay, I'll go out with you. You can show me the cave." No, I didn't expect very much. Here's the Mulia Rocks in the fair. It is outside the harbor of Paphos. And on a calm day, the rocks are visible. In a stormy sea, they're not. Okay, they would have been a hazard. All right, so we're out diving around, and all of a sudden, my companion disappears underwater. I'm waiting for him, and I start seeing bubbles coming up through the rocks. So I go down to look at him, and by God, he was right. There it is, a cave with a pot stuck in the ceiling. Wow. How did that happen? I went down, took some measurements. Here's Chris Brandon taking some measurements. And the only way that this would possibly have worked, unfortunately, I don't think the pots rose by themselves. What seems to have happened, my explanation is that a ship coming into the harbor of Paphos misjudged, hit these rocks, hit the reef in a storm, and spewed its cargo all over the surface of the reef. Over time, and Cyprus is such a geologically active area, an earthquake hit and breached the reef, and underneath the reef was washed out, creating the cave. And what had once been on the surface of the reef became the ceiling of the cave. That makes sense to me. So, the Cave of the Emperor is my article, and unfortunately, they didn't fly up there. Oh well. I'll keep opening. I'll find something. Why don't we go to more recent studies where I've had a chance to use some of the more modern equipment that's out there. And this is in the northern Aegean, which again, a very active geological area, and an area where, according to Herodotus, sea battles were fought between the Greeks and the Persians. Scalius cut the anchor ropes in some places. He also recovered some treasure that was dropped by the Persian king. Lots of exciting things happened there. So surely this was a place to do deep water survey. So, my first chance to go in a submersible. You can see off the left-hand corner, you see the beginnings of the name of this. The submarine itself is called the Thetis. Thetis was the mother of Achilles, the sea goddess. Perfect name for a submersible. As you see, it's a little bit cramped. There's room for the pilot and for me, or a scientist. I look at this now and I think of more recent events involving a submersible that imploded. Happily, this is the old style. That didn't. But anyway, here we are. On my first trip down, got down to about, I'm a very cautious man. Before getting in, I said to the pilot, this is electric batteries. How much time do we have? He said, about maybe 8 hours. What happens if it fails? Don't worry, it's a redundant system. Kick it immediately. What about the air system? I do like like to breathe. And it's kind of I've gotten used to that. Don't worry, we have extra, it's a redundant system there too. But what if the redundant system doesn't work? He said, well, I've got these scuba tanks here, we'll make them. And it's okay. And I watched him go around and he had his like pilot, he had a checklist. I saw that on one part of the submarine, a piece of duct tape, and I saw some plastic ties, I knew we're on good shape. So we're down about 600 feet, my first dive, and hit the bottom. When you're because it's electric battery, you don't turn on your lights until you actually get to the bottom. You go down with a little tiny light that's out there to help you remain sane as you go down, because when you're down below 325 in the med, it is seriously dark, seriously dark, and you want to at least have some point of reference. When you hit the bottom, then you turn on your electric motors and your propellers going away, you go to your target, and you turn the lights on. Okay, so we had just come down and hit the bottom, and all the lights go off. And I'm sitting there thinking, and you say, don't worry, don't come back on again. They did. It was a couple of maybe 30 seconds before they did. Some of the longest 30 seconds I've ever spent in my life. And I said to him, does this happen often? And he said, I wouldn't know, this is my first trip. I think we should go up. So we went up immediately. That was my first experience. When I went back with him the second time, the following year, by then he was experienced, and he admitted that he had kind of made a mistake on the checklist, but he hadn't done that. Now he was okay. So this time we're down to 1,000 feet, which is pretty close as far down as we can go with this type of submarine. Hit the bottom, and there is a sonar out there. So we turn the lights on, you can see about maybe 50 feet, but the sonar's out there ahead of time to let you know if you're going to bump into something. And there's a current coming towards us, pretty stiff, surprisingly, and we're going into the current. And all of a sudden on the sonar, I see a blip. The blip starts to move towards us at a very rapid rate. I say, what the hell is that? I haven't got the slightest idea. And it's coming at us faster and faster and faster. All of a sudden, it appears within we can see it, and it's a giant squid. And the squid goes boom, right into the plastic bubble. Ink everywhere. And we're shocked. And I said, I think we should go up. He said, that's a good idea. This operates like a buoyancy compensator. You can plug air in, or you open it up, fill the tanks with water and sinks, or you blow air into it and it goes up. So we went up very rapidly. I couldn't help thinking about that squid. Probably had a hell of a headache. But what a story to tell its buddies at the bar. The mothership, they were trying to capture me, but I escaped. That was an interesting moment, that's for sure. But my real, there's a submarine again, ready to go down. It was a lot of fun, I must admit. But the problem we have now, it's a bit like, I don't like the analogy, it's a bit like space travel. Humans versus robots. It took maybe 45 minutes to get down to where we were going to work, 1,000 feet. 45 minutes to get up. We didn't have that much time down there. You'll send a robot down, you don't have to worry about that. What's better? Well, is there room for both? I know the answer to that. The future is going to be a combination, I think, probably of both. What's really exciting now is we have the equipment now, and have been down to the deepest part of the ocean. We have been there. We can do that. And there's so much we don't know about the ocean. Somebody asked me before about Bob Hohlfelder. I had a chance to work with Bob in a couple of places. But Bob has reminded us that we know more about the surface of Mars than we do about the deep water of our own oceans. There's a 40,000-mile mountain range underwater. We have very little knowledge of it. I would imagine that in the lifetime of this young man here, we're probably gonna have found just about everything important in the deep waters of the ocean. That's your job, young man. I'm gonna give you the responsibility. So we have such wonderful discoveries ahead of us. It's truly, truly amazing. Now, to the most dangerous moment of my life. I grew up in Brooklyn before it was fashionable, in a pretty tough neighborhood. Was a captain in the U.S. Army, went through Ranger training, played football, lacrosse in college. I don't scare easily, but I got scared here. Where is here? Well, we're at the border of Turkey and Syria in a town called Mersin. And why I was there is that there's an ancient harbor that was built in the late 2nd century AD, probably the finest of all Roman harbors, a combination of Greek techniques and Roman techniques. I tried for a long time to get permission to do this, but there are a lot of problems working in Turkey. Turkey really is good at bureaucracy. Byzantines, the Ottomans, and a lot of Turks are not bad either. It's very hard to get a permit. I'd gone to the archaeological director's office in Ankara and talked to people there and told them what I wanted to do. I wanted to collect concrete samples and send them back to Italy to Italcementi, which is my company where I had all of my samples studied. They said, no archaeological samples can leave our country. But geological survey samples can. Geological, okay. Throw that away. What if I had them analyzed in Turkey? Oh, that's okay. So Italcementi, my sponsor for this project, had some relations with a cement company in Turkey. So the idea was that if I could get permission to do this work, they could send our kit of diving equipment by plane to Turkey, have it transported to, in theory, to the subsidiary company, where then they would put geological samples in the kit and send them back. That would be okay. Except they wouldn't be geological samples, they'd be archaeological samples. So, were there inherent problems here? Yes, there were. But I finally was able to get permission from a colleague of mine who has worked in Turkey and knew a Hittite archaeologist who was working at the Hittite site, early peoples of Turkey, and could care less about the Roman remains there. And he had agreed to let us work on this permit, so we got a permit to do this. Turkey has a practice of sending a commissioner, they're called, a representative of the Turkish government that oversees all the archaeological work going on the site, and he or she can cancel a project overnight for whatever reason if they think something is being done wrong. So I knew there would be a problem with a commissioner, but it also worked in Turkey to know that somehow you can get around commissioners. I had one, for example, that didn't really like, he could care less what we were doing, and as long as I gave him a nice fish dinner every day, he kind of oversaw us from his hotel room around the field. So there are ways around this. I figured, okay, I'll deal with that problem when I get there. And that arrow is pointed at a motel, which looms very large in my story. And here's the way the ancient harbor we think looked like. It's like an oval shape, and this is where we put our actual cores down. And it gives you some idea about why I thought I was so excited about this. It's at Caesarea, we saw that hollow wooden frame that was moved into position, and then the various cells were filled with cotton. Here we have an example of the ashlar masonry here with the clamps. This is for Greek construction, and rather than making the cells into which the concrete was poured out of wood, they were made out of blocks. It's kind of like a combination of the ancient Greek way of doing things and the Roman way. And the aggregate here was the hardest rock that the Romans could find, which was river rock. A fantastic engineering project. And I'm not much into AI, but I want to put this as a warning to all of you.
told one that one existed because I had it. And this is what they came back with.
The Emperor Vespasian never came near this site. And notice that on the reverse, you see a volcano. This is something that must have been, AI said, okay, Pompeii, they had a volcano. That's where that came from. The word Portus is on it, Pompeiopolis is on the obverse. All of this is wrong. So can AI make mistakes? You bet it can. The only time I thought, well, AI was brilliant is when I asked it to tell me about Roman marine concrete and why it survived so long. Out came its explanation was brilliant, everything I'd ever written. Phew, AI. Anyway, here's what the harbor really looked like in the ancient coin. And then we have a picture of the sea goddess, and you see the oval shape of the harbor. It's badly worn. This is a very unique coin. There aren't very many of these that have survived. Now, to my anxious moment. Getting my equipment from Italy to Turkey, flying it into Athens in a large wooden crate. It arrived, and customs officials went on strike in Germany. The director of the project at Pompeiopolis, the Hittite archaeologist, had asked me how much time I needed. I said probably 3 weeks to get it all to get done what I wanted to. Okay, 1 week was devoted to a strike where the customs people couldn't look at this stuff.
When that finally ended, and they went to put the crate on the plane to fly down to Adana, which is the airport closest to where we're working, the crate didn't fit. It's too big.
Got on the phone, managed to get a truck to drive it from Istanbul all the way down to the Turkish-Syrian border. It went into the customs office at Adana, where once again, they looked at the equipment again. They went through customs a second time. The director of the Turkish project under whose license I was working, called me aside and said, Bob, I got bad news for you. I've run out of money and I have to stop the project sooner than I expected. So by the time the crate actually arrived, I had 1 full day to do what I'd hoped to do in 3 weeks. And he said, oh, and there's something else you should know about. You know how down site, there's a motel down there? I said, yes. He said, well, that's the head of the local mafia. And they control all of the cargo that's moving into and out of Syria from there. And they put a gate across the road. You can't get to your site. I said, now you tell me. So that next morning, when I had 1 full day, I said, the hell with it. I drove my truck through the field, took apart the fence, drove down. We just left the gate, just drove down and started working. About maybe 9 o'clock in the morning, I looked down this road and coming out of this motel down here where the arrow is, 6 of the meanest looking guys I'd ever seen in my life, all of them holding lead pipes. And they start walking towards me, and I'm on this spit of land. And I just think, where the hell am I gonna go? I was really afraid for the first time in my life. I don't know how I'm gonna get out of this one. I admit that the Rangers have taught me many ways of killing people, but not 6 at a time. A long time ago. I'm not up to it right now. So I'm thinking, oh, geez, now what do I do? A miracle happened. In the distance, I hear sirens. The sirens are getting closer and closer and closer. And the guys with the lead pipes heard the sirens too. And they were coming right for the site. I said, how did the cavalry know I needed to be rescued? Well, they disappeared back into the site, and 3 or 4 limos drive up with a TV truck. And someone gets out, comes up and says, the mayor of Mersin is here to welcome you. He heard that you're a group of foreign scientists studying his harbor, and he wanted a TV spot that night in the local television. So he came with cameras, and he walked over, shook my hand, and he could care less about this, click, they're doing it away. But in the fashion of any politician, he said to me at the end, Bob, is there anything I can do to help you?
please let me know. Sir, we only have a day. It would be very helpful if you left a policeman down there in the car, prevent anybody else, tourists, from coming up and disturbing us. He said, I'll do that. So I never saw the guys with the pipe. Got my work done, got the hell out of there. Now, I have to show you a shark picture. Right? This is a different, now we're really in a different place now. I had an opportunity to, back up a bit. The co-director of my project in Israel, the Israeli co-director, was a wartime hero in their Sayeret, in their elite commando division. Absolutely. And I met some of his buddies, and in Israel you have, if you're a male, you have active duty responsibilities until you're 55. So I got to dive with a bunch of these guys, and we took a trip down in the Red Sea to a place called Zabagat Island, which has a large resident shark population. We all want to get pictures of sharks. Now that sounds strange unless you've been diving with them. And I have a lot of pictures of sharks swimming away. I get a lot of tails. But they tended to swim in one direction. So if you get in the water and they'd be coming at you. Well, on the way down, we encountered a large pod of porpoise. Oh, there were maybe 100 of them. And wherever you get a large pod of porpoise, you're going to find sharks. Because the sharks will sort of stay underneath, and the stuff that the porpoise don't eat floats down and they eat it. And in this case, I think they were silver tips. And the guys on these crazy commandos on the boat said, "We got a great idea. Let's throw a chicken in the water on a line and attract the sharks." And we didn't have a cage, but we had a diving ladder. So the idea was to stay behind the diving ladder. And the shark would take the chicken away and they could photograph. Well, these nuts did it, so I did it. And I was very happy when this one decided to take the chicken and disappear. Well, on one occasion, one of these guys said, "I don't need a ladder. I want to get a better photograph." So the chicken is being pulled in, and there were three sharks that were doing it. And all of a sudden, there were only two. And the third one had circled. It was coming in behind this guy. As he's out there, he's underwater with that. You can't yell at him. And I said, "Oh my God, what's going to happen?" And out of nowhere, about 7 or 8 dolphins show up. And boom, scare the sharks away. The dolphins, one-on-one, no chance, the shark will win. But they come out of shark as a group, and the dolphins will win. They know exactly where to hit them. And there he was, and the dolphins hit these sharks, they disappeared. The guy in the water realized he was jumping, so he got the hell out. But I'd never seen that before. I had read about how porpoise can save divers from sharks. It actually happened. It was pretty stupid of my part to be there, but at least I'm here to tell you about it. Most of the sharks I encountered in the Mediterranean were on land. A lot of those. I'm going to end. Also, this is what I always show. My wife and I are diving at Ras Mohammed, the tip of the Sinai. At one point in time, when the Israelis were in control of the Sinai, this was literally the best dive site in the world, even better than the Great Barrier Reef, or better than what you did in Indonesia. It isn't now. The Egyptians allow people to feed fish. And I heard recently in one of my talks, somebody was just back from the Sinai diving, and he said, people are now trying to feed sharks. Feed them. He said, well, I was there. The shark decided that they didn't just want the nibble, but they took the whole arm. Can you imagine anyone stupid enough to feed a shark? Anyway, Catherine and I are diving here. This is a Napoleon rafts. They're big animals. And usually they'll sort of stake out one of the large coral heads, and there'll be one of them. And this one was very friendly to follow me around. That's nice. They're a pretty benign animal, even though they can get almost the size of a Volkswagen. They can get up to 300 pounds. And
this I hadn't realized that why this one was following me was the fact that the Egyptians had allowed divers to start feeding these animals, and they liked hard-boiled eggs. And this animal thought that I had a hard-boiled egg for him. So I'm sitting there and I saw maybe the captain, come on down, come on down. And this animal makes a living crushing coral, grabbing my hand like this. It was like having someone slam a car door on me. And I had a camera around my neck, so I couldn't take a photograph, so I'm punching the thing in the nose. The thing is looking at me, what's all going on like this? Finally let go, and I looked down and I said, my God, I'm a Vulcan. I was deep enough in the water that the blood was green. I thought it was the Spock, the screen blood. Anyway, unfortunately I didn't get a picture of it, but I was lucky. My dive buddy that day was a Roman mosaicist. He got the whole thing. Okay, I'm gonna end with a fair wind and following seas. It's a traditional maritime greeting or a wish for all of you to have successful lives and good fortunes. I throw another little Latin phrase at the bottom by a philosopher named Seneca. And essentially it says, for someone who is ignorant of which port he is seeking, there is no fair wind. Good to keep in mind. Thanks very much.